Hey podcaster, I'm Tim Wahlberg, your podcast performance coach, with another actionable tip so you can grow your podcast authority, generate leads, and convert with ease. Today's tip is pick a podcast coach that serves your needs. Podcast coach is a pretty broad term. There are a lot of people calling themselves podcast coaches these days, and they all do different things with different approaches. The trick is to know what you actually need from a podcast coach before you hire one. So let's break down 5 of the most common types of podcast coaches you're likely to run into. Our first type of podcast coach is the fast launch coach. These are the Be a Podcaster by Friday folks. I just saw someone promising to get your podcast up in 24 hours. Skeptical? You should be, although technically, if you didn't care about quality, you could launch a podcast in 30 minutes. These coaches are all about the quick and dirty. Now, they're great for anyone who has been procrastinating for far too long and just wants to get it done already. And sure, if this is just a hobby, no big deal. But if your business and brand are on the line, fast isn't the win. You don't want a podcast that could confuse your brand, hurt your authority, or waste your time and money. The fast launch coach is your play if you don't care about the outcome, you just want to get it done. The second type of podcast coach is what I call the technical coach. These coaches live for gear and editing. They'll show you how to cut your own episodes, clean up your audio, and maybe even sharpen your video skills. They'll give you a list of equipment to buy, including everything from your mic to acoustic room treatment to the editing software. If your hang-up is tech, they can help, but don't expect them to talk about your message, your listener, your positioning, your show structure, or how your podcast grows your business. That's not their lane. A technical coach is perfect for you if you have everything else dialed in and you just need the tech to get going. The third type of podcast coach you might need is a performance coach. Think acting, voice, or speaking coach. They might not be listing themselves strictly as a podcast coach. They might have added podcasting to their toolkit. They'll help you sound more confident, get comfortable with your own voice, and help you deliver so that you can show up strong behind the mic. If strategy and tech are already handled, but you freeze every time you hit record or you've deleted a dozen attempts at an episode already, this is the kind of coach you need. I'm talking to you, perfectionists. All right, so far we've talked about a launch coach, a technical coach, and a performance coach. And our fourth type of podcast coach is the business coach, who also does podcast coaching. Sometimes your business coach has a podcast, so they tack on a little podcast guidance. That can be quite useful for strategy or marketing since they already know your business and have likely helped you develop a plan for growth. Everything should be dialed in from a strategic perspective, which is awesome. However, be careful. They may not be the best ones to teach you the technical or performance side of podcasting. It all depends on whether you've got a team filling in the gaps, as they likely do. This type of podcast coach is great if you're already working with someone you trust. Just be cautious about business coaches who add this on as a bonus. Your podcast should not be created as an also included because it will take up a significant amount of time and or money. And now the fifth and final type of podcast coach, the strategic podcast coach. These are the podcast coaches who do it all, the ones who look at the big picture and make sure your podcast connects with your brand, your listener, and your business goals. They ensure you have all the technical know-how you need without overwhelming you. They'll get to know your business and make sure your podcast attracts your ideal client and generates leads and sales. They'll work with you on content and performance so you represent your brand and show up consistently. They're looking at the big picture because they know that a powerful and effective podcast is the sum of its parts. This is the kind of podcast coach you want to hire if you want to get it right out of the gate. Not just launch fast, but launch right. This is the kind of coaching we offer. When I started out podcast coaching back in 2015, we were primarily helping people with performance, how to sound like a pro, and tech. What we discovered after working with our first dozen clients was that a great sounding show will only get you so far. The content and strategy were the more important pieces of the podcast success puzzle. So we zoomed out to look at the whole picture. Now we start with your why, your who, and what you want your podcast to do for your business. Then we help you with the content, the confidence, the tech, and the launch, and the consistency. We don't do piecemeal anymore, like just the tech or improve my interviewing skills, please, because we always landed back in the same spot. Why are you podcasting? We make sure your show is fully aligned with your marketing strategy so it grows your authority and delivers ROI. And we do it with one-on-one coaching. I'll make that 2-on-1 coaching because you get the benefit of 2 broadcasting and podcasting experts. Yeah, 2 coaches in your corner from start to finish to make sure you don't just launch a podcast, you create a marketing asset that will serve you, your business, and your ideal clients. Here's the truth many podcast coaches gloss over. Podcasting takes time and money. If your podcast isn't set up strategically, you'll waste both and probably end up in the podcast graveyard. So here's the bottom line. Be clear about what you want your podcast to do. Then pick a coach that actually serves your needs. And I hope that's just the tip you need. If you're looking for a podcast coach who can cover it all, strategy, content, performance, and tech, that's exactly what we do in our Concept to Casting podcast launch program and podcast tune-up program for those who already have a podcast. Why not try before you buy? Book your free podcast coaching call to give me a test drive as your coach. Go to podcastperformancecoach.com and click the big orange button to book your call right now. No more procrastinating. Let's get your podcast launched the right way or fix the underperforming podcast you already have. Book your free private podcast coaching call by using the link in the show notes or at podcastperformancecoach.com. I'm Tim Wahlberg. See ya!